ask the questions that you don't want to hear the answers to.
Andy Halko is the founder of Insivia and Buyer Twin, as well as the author of Buyer-Centric Operating System.
One of my foundational beliefs is that if you understand your customer better than anyone else, that is where success comes.
In today's episode, we touch on how people buy in the age of AI, how to leverage AI in order to understand our customers better, how to protect your business in order to survive in these uncertain times, and much more.
The whole marketing and sales journey is just a trust building exercise, and every single micro interaction is either adding or removing trust.
Over the last 2 decades, he's advised hundreds of companies, startups to enterprises, on how to transform customer understanding into an operating system that drives growth.
The only place that we're all honest is Google search box and now AI prompt box. That's about the only place that we don't hedge our information because we actually want to get something real out of it.
Andy's mission is simple: help organizations stop guessing and start seeing the world through the buyer's eyes.
Most successful really took their ego out of it and they focused on their customer.
Andy, you started Insivia about 22 years ago. What do you notice in the market back then that made you realize that this is the path I want to go?
I started at 22 years old, right out of college. I was a pretty bright-eyed, bushy-tailed kid at the time, and I had built some skills in programming and design. And so for me, it was really about, I want to start a business. I'm still early in my career. I have nothing to lose. I've got these really great skills. I'm going to try it and I'm going to get out there and, make it happen. And I won't lie, the first couple of years were very hard, a very hard grind. But now looking back, I think it's all worth it.
Absolutely, because often that's the case, right? You want to try something and then you hit those first roadblocks, first challenges. Do you remember some of the first challenges that you faced and how did you manage to overcome them?
Yeah, and just to kind of set my philosophy is I think good entrepreneurs learn how to go with the ups and downs. You are going to have really great highs. You're going to have really low lows. And it's kind of the people I think that can find that even keel, that even when everything's falling apart, they've got a little sense of calm. And even when things are really high, that they realize this may not last forever, so I have to plan. Those are the ones that are most successful. I think one of the biggest issues that I had in the very early days, I was a very skill-based entrepreneur, and I didn't understand building networks and creating relationships. And so, I was very much like, I put out my shingle, people are going to come to me, or I'll just do some outreach and I'll find business. And once I got through friends and family, it was really hard. And so it took me a little while to learn one of the most important things was to build a strong network, to create relationships with people that weren't just business and surface level. And once I created that, ecosystem of people that I became familiar with, they became familiar with me, that was when I started really seeing some real traction. But it took me a while to really figure that out.
Yeah, I hear you. And often, even nowadays, it's still an underappreciated skill to build that network around you. Because those will be next to you when you're not doing that well, when you're doing well, and you're kind of like picking up, and plus the opportunity that's come with that, right? We never have to underestimate our powerful network. And speaking of talking to people, you interview, if I remember correctly, over 200 founders. What's the common pattern that you see there, the blind spot that they're facing, most all of them?
Yeah. From a blind spot standpoint, I would say there's nothing that is one thing for everybody. But I did notice in doing those interviews that there are two clear groups. One group that I saw most successful really took their ego out of it and they focused on their customer. Some of those founders in that group, they would often launch a very basic product, give it away to people that were their ideal customer, and then ask a ton of questions and have no ego in it at all, that if that customer said, I would never use this, they asked why. They didn't get defensive, right? And so I think that idea of the founders that really talked to their audience, were really open, didn't have ego, were able to listen, those were the ones that I saw their companies on a trajectory that was just unbelievable. And the other group, I think, were much more of the makers. They believed in their idea. They didn't take as much feedback. And I think that those founders were on a much slower trajectory than those ones that had that open mindset, had that customer connection, were willing to shift based off of what they learned. And so I really tend to put them into those two groups when I look at anybody that, one, I've either interviewed or I talk to moving forward.
And for the second group, what would be your advice for them in order to let that ego aside and actually start talking to their customers?
Well, I think there's, something base enough that we obviously, we come up with an idea, or the whole reason that we start the journey of entrepreneurship or founding something, there's a little bit of ego there. There's a little bit of confidence. You wouldn't do it if you didn't have that. But I think there's the advice of being able to set it aside, that deep down confidence that you have is a great tool to keep you moving forward, to see you through those difficult times. But it is something that you really have to be able to compartmentalize and set aside for the good of your company and for the good of your product. And so my advice to them is typically go talk to your customers with an open mind. Ask the questions that you don't want to hear the answers to. And that's a big one, because sometimes we'll go talk to audiences, we'll talk to customers, and we only ask the questions in a way that we know we're going to get the answers that we want. It's called confirmation bias. And so I think for those founders that are in that second, bucket, really setting aside that ego, being open, going and asking the tough questions, and then really taking that in, even if it disrupts their core thinking, that's okay. And really, how do you take that and then infuse it into the business to make you better?
Can you give me some examples of both set of questions, like even if one or three that we go on the confirmation bias and want to hear those, oh yeah, that looks nice, that's my product, that's the solution that I offer, and the others that are, oh shit, I never thought about that.
Well, I think, I've seen it when the founder goes, they do a demo and they go, what do you think? Something high level, or do you like it? But they're not asking, would you spend money on this? How much money would you spend on it? At what point would you say it's not worth it for you anymore? What is the one feature that if it's not there, you're not going to spend your hard-earned dollars on it? It's a positioning of it, right? Is that, that audience that's going to buy has to be compelled to do it, and they have to see that money that they see as yours. Just be real about it. Their money that they're going to give away for something. And if you're not asking those questions of, would you actually hand me $10 for this? Or how much is it worth to you to have this? If you're instead asking the high level questions of, do you like it? That's typically what I see, is just these very light, fluffy questions where someone goes, oh yeah, it sounds great. It looks cool, blah, blah, blah. But they don't follow up with the real hard hitting questions of, why would you say no? Would you actually give me real money today? All of these ones that are potentially going to give you the answers you don't want to hear, which is no, I don't want it. Or no, I don't think it's worth $10. I would think it's worth $1. That's stuff you don't want to hear, but it's stuff you have to ask.
Absolutely, because then the natural follow-up question is like, why? why you don't want to spend money on it, why you don't want to test it at all, or why is not this working, whatever. And that will naturally lead to make a better product, make a better service, and so on. But yeah, still, like, unfortunately, a lot of us are avoiding those type of tricky questions. But once we lead with that buyer-centric approach, everything can change. Our product, our approach, our services. And what's your take on personas?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I'm in the agency world. I have been for many years. One of my foundational beliefs is that if you understand your customer better than anyone else, that is where success comes. If we're developing a product, we need to do that based off of the goals our audience wants to achieve or the pains that they're feeling. If we want to reach them in marketing, we have to understand their motivations or, what is driving them or keeping them up at night. If we want to close them in sales, we have to understand what are the factors that they use to make a decision in a process or who is part of their buying committee. Every piece of our business revolves around our target audience, our customer, our buyer. And if we don't know that inside and out, it's really hard to be successful. Most companies that plateau, it's because they've moved way too far away from their buyer and they're not building that into their business. So we get back to personas, which you asked about. Well, I think personas have been used for 30, 40, 50 years, but they're that iStock photo, Joe Smith, 25 to 45. That is not the type of information. That is not the tool that is going to put you next to the buyer, that's going to put you in their shoes, that's going to give you the mindset. And so for me, I think personas are dead, which is one of the reasons I talk a lot about the evolution of it, which is twins. And in the AI world, that we're able to actually create clones of our audience and really have interaction and really get deep rather than a persona, which is a very flat and in some cases useless exercise.
And can you get into the degree of this? What is actually an evolution? What are the characteristics of a twin?
Yeah. So for a twin, what you really need to do is have depth of information. Again, with personas, you see that slide and you've got a couple of different, you have a few objectives and goals. What you want to do is get depth, is really understanding pains, buying factors, motivations, decision influencers, trends, and not only collect that information, but prioritize it. We have a product that does this process, and you can prioritize these factors to really hone this person. But then the big thing of a twin is being able to converse and interact with them, that you can ask a question, that you can say, hey, I want to sell this product. Tell me what message would actually get you to click on an ad. Or you could give them a website page and say, after reading this, would you buy? Would you actually fill out a contact form? And so it becomes a scenario where a twin becomes a companion that's sitting next to you that represents your audience and is giving you feedback. A persona is a flat slide that you have to interpret everything. You have to fill a lot of gaps. You have to make assumptions. And so the whole goal with a twin is really to remove that assumptive nature and actually get real answers.
You have a buyer twin, it's called, right? So you have that tool to nail this down. Can you walk us a bit on how?
We built Buyer Twin as a software where you can go in and create a clone of a very specific audience that you have. Let's say you're selling to chief information officers of manufacturing firms that are between 10 and 100 employees. You create that clone. Our system uses AI and data sources to enrich it, and then you can actually interact with it. You can give it web pages and say, tell me what you think. You can upload ads and say, would you click on this? You can say, hey, let's brainstorm messaging if I'm trying to sell you a procurement software, whatever it might be. And so Buyer Twin, our software, is really the, culmination of my philosophy over the years, is that if you can center around your customer and you can ask every question and really know them inside and out, you will be more successful. And so that was the whole reason I created the product, is mainly because it was the delivery mechanism of my core philosophy.
And to make those listening better understanding, so what type of information you feed the tool, and what type of information the AI is enriching that particular audience with?
Yeah, it's a mixture of both, right? So when someone creates a new clone, they may select an industry like manufacturing, and we have APIs that can go out and collect information about a sector, where it would pull in based off the size, like the types of employees, org structure, other information. Then when you select the size of the company, it kind of refines it a little bit more. You select your location, if they're in the United States or if they're in Europe, it'll pull in some other additional information. And then when you create that clone, you say, okay, chief information officer, it grabs some general information about chief information officers. We have some APIs that can go out and actually get job descriptions of CIOs at certain levels within companies. And then we take all of that and we form it and we push it out to things like OpenAI, Perplexity, Gemini. We're connected with all of them. And we ask it to help, okay, now that it's a manufacturing company, this size, here are some factors that a CIO cares about. Now help me organize and prioritize this to really make sure that I've created a clone that accurately represents who I'm trying to reach.
That's super powerful because you solve the unsexy part of marketing. A lot of people try as much as possible to avoid this type of deep dives, research, and exercise that actually lead to understand your customers better. And I am on the same page with you. I love to lead with this before we even touch the product, the offer, the other marketing assets. And still, I see people struggling to identify the first pieces. Like, for example, when it comes to you have an idea, you identify this problem maybe for yourself or for others, and you think you have a solution for it, but you don't even know where to start into identifying that audience. From your point of view, what would be the first steps in doing so?
Yeah, what I often start out with in any business is segment prioritization. So we want to talk about not necessarily the role, but the groups. And so we actually have an exercise that I've used for a decade plus that we put into the product Buyer Twin, where you break up your segments. And I'm a big believer is you have to really make them small and divided. So you may have segments where it's manufacturing in Europe between 100 and 500 employees, manufacturing in the United States between 100 and 500, healthcare between this, right? And I think many people start wide. They think like manufacturing across the whole world at any size, or everybody could be our customer, anybody that does human resources in any company. Well, the first step is let's break up some narrow segments that really make sense. And then let's prioritize them. And we actually have an exercise that goes through for each of those narrow segments, measure the demand. How much need for your product is there within that? Measure your expertise. How much knowledge do you have and experience in the past for that segment that can help you sell? Specialization. How unique is your product or offering for just that segment and not just the world? And we've got a couple of others. And you score those. And at the end, if you had 10 original narrow segments, you can score that to a point that you have 3 that are your best opportunities because there's high demand, you've got good experience, you've got high specialization, all of these different factors that now you can narrow your whole product and marketing and sales mentality down to say, I am going to capture market share in best opportunity zone.
If you take the first one, the demand part, how someone, and we can make it very tactical if you want. Let's take a consultant in the maybe AI space that is willing to go on that route. So they identify the segment, and after that, they want to make sure there's enough demand for their solution. How do you practically measure that?
That is a hard part. There is some pieces that you can pull in data to understand demand. With something new like AI, I think there is a challenge because there's not a lot of data out there necessarily. And so you really have to pull it off of just general trends or mentions that you can pull off of social media, sentiment analysis. There are some organizations that you can go out and get data where they've done specific surveys. I think the newer it is and the more, cutting edge like AI, it's harder to be able to find concrete data that will tell you things like demand, that in these industries. So I think you do have to take a little bit of that on yourself. You're going to have to go out and do some research, do some talking to people. You're not going to be able to rely on data. Versus older industries, like if I'm dealing with a manufacturer that's selling, house goods, there is so much data out there about even specific categories that you can pull in to understand demand, other areas of businesses. So I think when you get the things that are newer and you're trying to create a product, especially in a whole new category, or you think this is a product that doesn't currently exist, that is kind of a different process because you've really got to get manual with it, even with the best technology out there.
And do you believe that even for industry that has been around for a while, will manual work, like talking directly to customers or potential customers, beat the technology? Or technology is so good right now that you can literally skip that step?
I think it's a mixture of both. In our software Buyer Twin, we do actually have the ability that you can create a survey for a specific persona or twin, and you can send that survey out to people that match that audience, gather information, and bring it back. But I say both because I think, one of the biggest challenges that I found with doing interviews and talking to people is that most people don't give you truth or give you the full information. It's just how we are as human beings. I mean, they've talked about it for decades that, you go do a survey, people lie even if it's anonymous. About the only place that we're all honest is Google search box and now AI prompt box. It's about the only place that we don't hedge our information because we actually want to get something real out of it. But there have been studies that even in anonymous surveys, people lie. If they're not anonymous, they're going to hedge. They're not going to share everything. It's just kind of a human nature thing. So I think you have to be really careful about using real information from people. Whereas I think, has a capability to do some analysis and think beyond that, and really give you perspectives that maybe a human wouldn't. And even though it's based in data that's out there, you can prompt it correctly to say, really push on this, really think differently. And so I really think right now the combination of the two is the most powerful. Pull in some real data, pull in some unbiased AI data, and then use AI to analyze both to really try and surface the most important pieces.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And you touched there on something that is related to the trust factor that we basically, it's one of the biggest challenges nowadays on any kind of industry. And it's so hard now to build that trust with your audience and with the buyers. In your industry, how do you overcome that? Especially, for example, like it comes to technology and that replacing parts of the human and the hands-on work.
It's funny, I'm writing a book, my second book, and I have a whole chapter on the trust recession, and the fact that I think we're all have been trained to be weary of everything. You know, you look at scams and people trying to get our information and hacking and fake things on social media. And, you know, you can get into politics and corporations, but we're all have been trained to be skeptical because we have to be safe, right? And AI has become an interesting animal in that. That's what the book is a lot about, is how it's changing the mindset of people. But I believe AI companies are doing a really good job of building trust in their platforms. You know, we see it when we use ChatGPT and it's like, excellent idea, or you're really on to something. And the fact that it can deliver these really definitive answers, even if it's looking at wide ranges of information. And so there's this interesting thing right now in my mind with trust, is that I think a lot of people have lost trust in almost every channel. AI is new, and I think it's got some trust, but there are definitely people that are skeptical. But I do believe that those businesses, one of the biggest things that they're going to focus on is making sure that they maintain and build trust with the audience, because that's what's going to keep people coming back. And so we're going to have this battle where AI is going to try and constantly gain trust from people. And the question is, do they continue to lose it from these other channels, even human to human, right? Um, and your question was, how do you gain it? I think for me, even in the book, I talk about it a little bit, but honestly, you know, I talk about radical transparency, that in business, that we have to move to a radical transparency space where we are giving things away. We don't hedge. We, you know, for years, a lot of consultants wouldn't share their pricing because they wanted to wait until somebody got on a call. That is not the trust economy anymore. You have to get that out there. What you've done wrong, even if you've made mistakes, that story should be out there because it builds trust, because you're being honest. Even if it's a mistake, it's what you learn from it. So I do think that we're in an interesting time right now, that trust is eroded. AI is going to work really hard to build trust from people over humans, and that companies are going to have to shift their mindset to produce radical transparency so that they can compete in this world.
And those that have experience with building in public will definitely win, because, and I think it's a very good point, the fact that you don't have to gatekeep any more things. Like, especially now with AI, like information is not why people are buying, right? It's more that unique approach that you have, maybe the insights that only you can share based on what you achieve and so on. And showing that through building in public, to showing the mistakes that you made, to all the other things that you mentioned, I think that will be super powerful. Also to stand out. And apart from that, what do you believe there are the major factors why people buy, and especially in this context that we talk about of lack of trust?
Well, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because major factors of why people buy, I think it's a trust path where, you know, when you think of marketing, someone sees an ad, there is zero trust. And so they are starting at, you know, just nothing. Versus if you are selling and you get a referral, there's built-in trust, right? And that's further along. And everybody says, like, if they build their business off referral, it's easier, right? The path, there's less friction. But if you're getting people off of search or ads or social media, a lot of times their first interaction, trust is at zero. And then every word, every click that they make is a action of either gaining trust or losing trust in someone. So they click to a new page and they read, oh, you do this for manufacturing, but I'm in healthcare. Well, you either gained trust or you lost it. If they're in manufacturing, they gain trust. They were in, something else, they didn't. And Everything's like that. I see a case study. Do I build trust? I see a face of someone that works at the company and it looks real. Trust. Or these other things that erode it. And so I'm really just a big believer that the whole marketing and sales journey is just a trust building exercise. And every single micro interaction is either adding or removing trust. Um, and you're not going to get a conversion on your website until you've built enough trust. And you're not going to get a sale until you've built enough trust further to actually get somebody to pay. And so for me, it all comes down to that.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you're familiar with the 7-Eleven 4 study that Google made a couple of years ago, when you was like, you need to have 7 hours of content that your buyers consume on 11 touch points on 4 different platforms or something like that. And someone shared with me in a recording earlier today that now the touch points raised to 22, particularly about the thing that you mentioned about lack of trust, and you have to build that. Like 22 touch points, like it's a lot.
Well, I'll be honest, I think it's even different than that, because the book that I'm writing is going to be called The Omniscient Buyer. And my belief is that we are now in an age where everyone is going to be buying differently. Before they would go and visit a website, they would read a couple pages, maybe they'd come back and read an article, they'd check you out on LinkedIn, etc. And the old saying was, people did 70% of the research before they reached out to someone about buying. Now with AI, buyers, the people that buy from you, are going to do everything in there. They're going to go in and say, I'm, a procurement software company. I need marketing. Who is the best for me? And AI is going to deliver a nice chart that says these 5 companies and here's why, each of them. And then they're going to ask their AI, okay, of this company, can you tell me all of the feedback that is about them on the web? And it is going to pull in every review. It's going to pull in every case study and give them a nice, simple identification. And then that buyer is going to go and they're going to be like, hey, give me 10 questions that I should ask this company if I reach out to them. And so we are in a whole new world where you talk about 22 touch points. Well, those 22 touch points are going to happen in an AI engine. And so it's what the AI engine answers about you that's going to matter. And so I really think this omniscient buyer, which I'm writing about, is the fact that buyers now are going to have so much information at their fingertips instantly that the old ways of marketing, 22 touch points on our website, the old ways of sales are going to change, because if they get on a demo call with you, they're going to have it recorded and the AI is going to fact check every word that you say. If you mention something on your demo call, they're going to feed it up into their AI, and their AI is going to say, no, I see reports that feature doesn't work very well, and this is a company that, does it better. We are currently at this massive shift and massive change in how people buy from us, and I really don't think anybody's ready for it.
That's interesting, man. How you become ready? Because from a customer perspective, what you just shared is brilliant, because yes, you can do your own research very fast without actually consuming so much content from that individual or company and so on. From a seller perspective, how do we actually protect ourselves? Why?
That's why you're going to have to get the book, but I will share. I mean, for me, a lot of it in the book is about how do you optimize for AI engines, your brand, so that it is communicated correctly in the engines. I talked about radical transparency. That's one of the chapters, is we need to put more information out there that AI engines can consume, because otherwise they'll make assumptions. If you don't put case studies out there and someone asks their AI engine, does this company do X? That AI engine either is going to say instantly no, or they're going to make up something and say, based on a guess of these couple of things that I found on their site, yes, they do, but they're not very good at it, right? But what we need to do, radical transparency, is we have to start getting some of this really good stuff out there that we know our audience is going to ask AI. And there's a number of other things, but that's what I'm trying to really think through and build, is what is the new playbook for this whole new approach to dealing with who we're selling to.
And what will you actually avoid sharing? Is something that will decrease that trust that you're trying to build. With all the radical transparency, it must be something that you want to avoid, right?
Yeah, and at least for me, how I've positioned it is that put some of those things out there, but obviously explain them, because again, I think with AI, it's going to uncover this stuff. You know, it can look at Reddit posts, it can look at reviews on different directories, it can look at your website, it can find some old PDF that's sitting up on a server somewhere, and all of that goes into its training. And so even if there's something that you want to hide, I think it's going to be hard to keep it hidden. And then when a buyer actually finds out about it, it erodes trust very quickly. And so the alternative for me is, how do you take that and either position it as a learning lesson or a problem that you solved? You know, we had a lot of turnover in our company during this time, but here's how we solved it by incorporating these things. And now our team's really strong. I think that's better than AI responding, oh, it looks like by Glassdoor that they had a lot of people leave their company 2 years ago. Well, I'd rather have an article on my site that talks about, yeah, we lost some people, but we built new systems, created new culture, and it's extremely strong, because then the AI will report, hey, there were some challenges, but the company is very strong now.
That's smart. And I would go as far as using bad reviews in order to create some behind the scenes why that happened. Because often it's not the product fault or the business behind the actual negative outcome fault, but rather certain circumstances that fall into place. And yeah, that's a clever way to do it. And I was thinking, like, as you often hear this advice of being authentic, like try to share as much as you can in your own way of doing things, in a way. Do you believe that to be true, or should people wear different hats based on what and how they want to be perceived?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a black and white answer to that question of yes, oh, just be authentic, or, you know, wear different hats. I think it comes down to, yes, you want to be authentic because there is truth. And, you know, that is, we are in this trust economy where we have to build trust. But I also do think there's understanding your audience and highlighting your strengths to certain people. You know, being strategic about some of these things, that you understand what people are motivated by. There is nothing wrong with being authentic, but tailoring your authenticity to the audience that you're speaking to at the moment. Um, I think what the real problem is, if you're faking it to a certain audience to a certain point, or being dishonest, that's when you get into that tough territory. Um, but yeah, if I talk to, I'm a founder, if I talk to another founder, I'm going to have a different authentic experience with them than I will as if I talk to a marketing manager of a company. And I can still have authentic conversations with both, but they are going to be very different and very tailored to those people.
100%. And I think this leads to something that I'm super curious when it comes to this AI agent world we are living. Like, I think last week or a few days ago, ChatGPT made public the agent version that incorporates the deep search and deep research, and already AI is buying things for us, like ordering coffee or other things. And we are closing to this world in which we need something. Either it's a physical product, or maybe making a hire, or finding the right agency or the right person to outsource to. And we'll just go to ChatGPT or another tool and like find me that individual or find me that thing, and even allow them to make the decision for us. So we are not just outsourcing like our search and research, but outsourcing the decision making as well. What your take on that, and how we can even protect us further in order to appear in that search results, or AI making the choice of choosing us or our service, product, whatever?
Yeah, it's interesting in that book that I'm writing, I have kind of three levels. Is the human buyer, the human AI augmented buyer, and then the AI buyer. And I do think there is a future coming where, to your point, an AI agent fills out a contact form on a website. They receive the email and then they send back a series of questions. They get the answers and they make a short list and then they create an RFP and they send the RFP out. They receive the document and they scan and they create a criteria and a scoring to have the top three companies. And then they're really just presenting, here's the one company that you should work with. And a human never touched any of that. The other thing I started talking about a little bit in the book is I think there's going to be embedded systems where AI is going to evaluate vendors. You know, if you're a marketing agency working with a company, their AI is going to be looking at your emails. It's going to be looking at your reports. It's going to be looking at other stuff. And it's going to say, I don't think this company is producing the best results for you. And based on what I can find on the web, this one would do better. And so now you're going to be competing with an internal AI that has access to every piece of information to tell that team that you're working with whether you're doing a good job or not. And so I do think that whole idea of both AI being the complete buyer, as well as AI being the evaluator and the, controller of relationships with vendors, it's coming eventually. And it again is going to be such a different way to sell. But I think most companies are not even thinking or prepared for this new reality that will be here.
Can you give them, apart from what you already shared, some steps they need to follow at least on a high level, like do this and that, and you'll actually be more aware, more prepared than all the others that are not doing anything?
Well, one of the things that I talk about as a tactic in the book is really this idea of you obviously have to start going in these AI engines and prompting the way your buyers would. So I have a 7 category framework where you actually walk through, and in discovery, here are the questions you should be asking AI to see what it pulls back. Who's the best marketing agency for tech companies? Okay, ask that question, see what comes back. Do it in actually multiple engines and see how those answers compare. Then take your proposal, upload it into ChatGPT and say, summarize this for me. See what it can read, what it interprets, and how it pushes it out. Because if you don't know that and your buyer does it, you're completely in the dark. And so I really think companies now have to start having AI as a tool internally to judge what they do, to make sure that they understand how AI is parsing it, summarizing it, analyzing it, because your emails, your proposals, your sales docs, all of that stuff is going to be uploaded into AI by your buyer and is going to be summarized down to a paragraph. And so we need to be prepared for it. And so the one thing that I can tell people to do now is, if you haven't started putting your information in there and saying, summarize this, tell me what you think, you're already behind.
Yeah, because often we might assume this AI tool and chatbots will get certain insights for everything that we share. The reality is very different. They'll probably get parts that you never thought about. And playing with it, like rewriting, optimizing, maybe using bullet points, because you'll often these tools use that approach in order to look for patterns and insights, will be much more easier. And I think that might be also the path towards the move from SEO to AIO, rather than just doing SEO the classic way. And yeah, we need to play basically. We need to use these tools. We need to integrate them. Otherwise, we'll be left behind. And often is this narrative like AI will replace you, but probably the right saying is that even that sounds dark, but AI might kill your business if you don't do something about it.
I 100% agree. And it's interesting in marketing. I've been kind of talking about this idea of creativity versus consistency For humans, messaging as marketers, we want to be creative to catch attention. For AI engines, we want to be consistent so that the algorithm learns a specific thing about us and we say it the same way every time. And so if you say something on your website in a sales doc and a PDF and a case study, the AI is going to reward consistency. But we've been taught to try and do creativity to catch attention. And so it's an interesting thing as we're in this shift is, how do you balance creativity with consistency to serve both humans and AI?
Yeah, good point. Good point, because creativity help us this far, and we still can use it, but think creativity rather than just be creative for the sake of it and repeating the same thing. That's smart, especially because people push this narrative like say the same thing in 1,000 different way or something like that. But often might be the case if you say that in so many different ways, AI might be confused and won't spit out the exact thing that you want, actually the message that you want to send out there. But let's say if you could go to podcasts like this one and you just share the same thing all over again, AI will scan and scrape those podcasts and you get that piece of information like associated with you and so on.
Yeah, AI is an algorithm that is building patterns of what words connect to each other, right? So every time you're using different words, it's creating a new pattern. And so you really do have to think about that consistency piece.
Yeah, this opens my mind in so many ways and opens my eyes in so many ways. So thank you so much for doing this, like doing your work and putting this information out there. Help us avoid the pitfalls of the shift that is happening right now. And for those interested in connecting with you, working with you, using your tools or getting the book when it goes out, where they should connect with you.
Yeah, if they want to go to andyhalko.com, I've got access to everything. I do think checking out buyertwin.com, which is the product to create AI clones. And then August 11th, my new book, The Omniscient Buyer, will be out. And I do think it will be the new Bible and playbook for how marketing and sales need to act in this next era.
Nice. And episode will drop right on time, a bit after a book release. So I'll definitely have the links as well in the show notes with book including. And you already got me interested. I can't wait to read it because I love your perspective on how you see this world and the marketing space that I'm living into. And before concluding, just imagine that you drop back in time and you meet a younger version of yourself that just head into marketing. The problem is that you have just 1 minute with that individual, which is yourself. What will be your advice to them with using your knowledge that you have now?
It's a hard question. I would just say be ready for anything. We are in an industry now that's shifting, but it always has changed and it always will change. And I think that openness and ability to be agile, I would make sure I told myself, dive in, keep learning, be agile, always grow.
Love it, Andy. And if someone wants to survive in this world, should follow that advice because if you're able to reinvent yourself and adapt, is the way to succeed in entrepreneurial world. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was Andy Halko on Authority in the Wild.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.